Everyone, welcome to the Bay Area Content Marketing Meetup. I guess it's now officially spring. We have a great guest today, Melanie Deziel. She's going to talk about the Content Fuel framework. You probably see it behind her, but I have my own copy here. And as I said, we will be giving away 5 copies of this wonderful book. So Melanie's going to talk about the framework on how you can generate hundreds of ideas for your content marketing. Melanie, thanks for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. And I know I mentioned earlier, but for anyone who recently joined, speaking of spring, I am in the throes of allergies over here. We recently moved down south, so it's like a whole new set of plants. So appreciate your patience. I'll probably be grabbing a drink a little more than usual here. But I'm super excited. So one of the things that's super fun about like presenting to fellow content marketers is that you get it, which like I'm sure many of us are. I mean, sometimes we're the only person in the room or in the in our organization that gets it. So it's awesome to be with other content marketing folks. Exactly as Dennis said, I'm going to be talking about the framework that I talk about in the book. Essentially, it's like a decision-making matrix, a process you can follow to come up with content ideas. One thing to just get out of the way, what you won't do today is learn about new types of content that you didn't know existed. What you will learn is a new way to organize those ideas in your head that hopefully allows you to access it a little bit better. So hopefully we'll get there. The whole reason for this comes from the fact that I realize that so much of what we do in marketing has a system. It has, there's processes, there's predefined KPIs, there's timelines, there's project management. But the idea generation portion of our content marketing is rarely that structured. And a big part of that is the fact that we've been sold this like Hollywood story that ideas and creativity are things that happen, like we've got the light bulb and the lightning strike and there's the muse, and we're sort of sold this idea that it's spontaneous and it's not something that you can teach or control or sort of access on demand. And I mean, really, that's just not the case at all. The difference is that we don't have a system for how to access that creativity when we need it. So that's what we're going to do today, is kind of walk through that. It gives us a bit of a system. Now, the basis for this system, which hopefully we can all get on board with, because that'll make the rest of today a lot easier, is the idea that content ideas are actually a combination of 2 things. And I think, again, this intrinsically, it's just sort of a different way of thinking about it. A lot of times when we sit down to come up with a content idea, we're thinking about one or the other of these elements, a focus being like, what is it that we're going to say? And the format being how we say it. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the reality is every content idea, every piece of content you've ever consumed or created is made up of both of these elements. It's saying something and it has a method by which to say it. So focus, you might also use like angle, perspective, topic. These are all, sort of synonyms for the focus. Like, what is it that we're actually trying to convey, to teach, to share when we're creating this piece of content? And then the format is how we actually say it. So this is the stuff we have more language around already. This is like video, infographic, writing, and we'll dig into that in a little bit. But yeah, so every content idea is actually both of these things. And so sometimes when we struggle to come up with content ideas, it's because some members of our team are shouting out formats, others are thinking of topics, some people are thinking of like a whole series versus a single piece of content, and we kind of don't have an organized way of going about it. So hopefully that's what we're going to have today. I'm going to be able to give you a system. As Dennis said, it's the promise is hundreds of content ideas. I haven't had anyone ask me for a refund yet, but that's hopefully that's what we're aiming for. The way we're going to achieve that in a way that isn't just a fire hose of information is we're going to create a matrix with 10 different focuses and 10 different formats. So if you plot those out and you look at all the different combinations, you end up with 100 possible combinations. And then I'll give you what I call multipliers toward the end that allow you to kind of flip back and forth and make one idea into several. So that's the promise. Like I said, a lot of these are going to be familiar to you. It's not entirely new information. It's just a new structure, a new way of looking at that information. The way I've organized it is that we're going to dive into the focuses first. I'm going to show you 5 that you're probably super familiar with, that you're probably using already. And then I'll go into a little more detail about 5 that may be less familiar for you. And we'll do the same thing with formats after that. And then we'll take a look at the matrix we've pulled together with all of those. The one point I just want to make here, because this is super important for me, is that you should always be starting with the focus. And I think, again, many of us here, you guys get this, but just to like drive the point home, you know, when we're working with folks who are less familiar with content or maybe from another department or something, they tend to think in formats. When they ask you for something, hey, I need a video. Hey, I need an article. I need a graphic, right? They think in formats, and less frequently are they thinking in the focus and what it is that we're actually trying to say. And that's the, you know, well, what would you like me to put into the video or into the article, right? What is it actually trying to say? So always encouraging folks, start with that focus and then figure out the best way to bring that to life. And the analogy I use for this, just because I feel like it's somewhat universal. Have you ever gotten a package in the mail and like they clearly picked the box before they knew what was going inside of it, and it was like dramatically too large or like, you know, too small, and they like cut it and taped it? That's kind of the experience we give our audience when we pick the format first. We end up putting something that doesn't really fit. We're kind of trying to retrofit it and make it work, fill it with a bunch of fluff or like add on to it. We're leaving stuff out that should have been in. So that's kind of how I like to think of it. And I find that when I'm explaining it to folks that way, they tend to get it. And they're like, okay, that makes sense. Like, let's figure out what we're saying and then figure out the packaging to put it in. So hopefully that proves useful for any of you who may run into similar conversations sometimes. All right, so let's dive into these familiar 5. So again, these are the focuses. These are the perspectives you might take, the angles, the ways you might approach your story. This is, again, the what we're saying, not yet the how we're saying it. The first one is people. This, I think we all do naturally, right? This is profiles or interviews or day in the life or Q&As with someone. This is, you know, profiling a customer or an employee spotlight. Any content that's really about people is people-focused content. I have had to make the note here that this includes non-human people, because someone was like, well, we do livestock. Do cows count as people? And I'm like, sure, cows can be people. Why not? It could also be sort of a club, a team, an organization, a department. You know, so if your people-focused stories happens to be focused on several people, that's okay too. This is less, again, about like a strict system of choosing one and more about kind of giving yourself a method for moving through the different ways to tell a story. The next one is basics. So this is the type of content where we're assuming our audience has a very low level of experience, understanding, knowledge of our topic, and we recognize that we've got to give them that sort of 101 content. So the stuff you often see with basics focused content is, you know, terms you should know, key players, everything you need to know about such and such. You know, we see these before big events sometimes where, like, you know, I don't know, the Oscars are coming up and they're like, you know, the 10 movies you should probably know before you watch the Oscars or something like that. Or especially sporting events, they do a lot of that too, right? Like what you need to know to watch the Super Bowl and sound like you know what you're talking about, like really basic level stuff. This stuff is super fun. There's, as I'm sure you guys have run into, there's sometimes some opposition about creating basic content with the assumption that like other people have created it before. You know, we're not the first ones to drop like terms you should know or, you know, things like that. Okay, yeah, the 10 movies to watch before they leave Netflix. Perfect. So that's a great example. It's the thing with this is that if you're making this basic content, even if someone else has created it, again, my response for the folks who may have some opposition there is like, well, wouldn't you rather they find ours than theirs, right? So even if it's been created before, it's kind of like setting that foundation of we've got the stuff out there. If someone's going to learn, they're going to learn from us. And then we have the sister to basics content. We've got the detailed content. So these are sort of the two ends of the spectrum. The basic content, again, introductory, 101, not going incredibly in depth. And then our details focused content, that's the stuff for our audience that's more familiar. So, you know, to go with your example here about Netflix, Dennis, you know, the 10 movies to watch before they leave Netflix, that's probably a listicle, probably really short and easy to consume. But then I don't know, the Washington Post investigative piece about how they lost the rights to content and what that means for the future of entertainment. Like that's the detailed version, right? For the folks who are a little more advanced, looking for a more in-depth look at a particular topic. So I always like to say, if we're making either basics or details focused content, there's a good chance we can adapt that and make the opposite as well. Most of our messages are being sold to sent to folks who are either new to us or have been around the space for a while. So always a good reminder to say, yeah, can we talk to sort of our newer audience and our more established audience in different ways on this topic. Next one in the familiar five is the product. So I don't need to tell you all how to make product focused content. We do this all the time. This is everything from like your product description pages. And he's asking if behind the scenes is included in details. Yeah, it absolutely can be. And you'll see that, like I said, there's kind of some fuzzy borders between some of these as we get to the others too. And for me, it's less about which category does something fall into and more about, have you tried each prompt to come up with these ideas? But yeah, I would say a lot of behind the scenes content, it could go either way. It could be like, hey, here's what we do at such and such Burger Co. And it's like a quick overview. It could be like going in depth, like here's the machine that we use and here's how the machine works. And it's like a much more in depth, I don't know what machines you're using for burgers, but hopefully you get the general vibe there. It would be a much more detailed look. But yeah, behind the scenes could fall into that category. You could also come up with a behind the scenes idea for people. For example, if we're going to do a day in the life, you could say, okay, well, if we're following around an employee for the day, that's kind of people, kind of behind the scenes, could kind of fall into either category. But the product focused stuff is the more bottom funnel stuff. It's the stuff where we're talking about, features, flavors, sizes, dates, pricing, things like that. Anything that's really, really product focused, again, tends to be more bottom funnel. This is in here largely because I think I like to talk about really fun storytelling, and my background is as a journalist, so I tend toward the unbranded, but I'm not against the product focused content. It's important. It's a vital part of our strategy. So making sure it's in the list of ways we consider telling each story, I think is important. All right, and the last one of the familiar five is opinion. Now opinion content, I think we can, as brands at least, especially if you're in a heavily regulated space, like opinion content sounds super scary. So just want to clarify that this doesn't necessarily mean, endorsing a political candidate or taking a stance on a highly divisive issue. Like this could just be our employees' favorite XYZ as part of a list rather than just a list. So, coming back to your example, Dennis, the 10 movies to watch before they leave Netflix, like our employees' favorite movies that are leaving Netflix this month. Like we've sprinkled some opinion in there. Anything that's like a subjective ranking as opposed to an objective ranking. There's, this is a lot of your thought leadership content. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be divisive. It can really just be, I say, like sprinkling judgment, human judgment. Someone made a choice about something onto your content. So again, these are the familiar five. These are, again, five that you're probably doing to some degree already. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into five more that maybe are newer, maybe present a new way to approach things or just inspire some new ideas. So next one is curation. And this is really about creating collections of some kind. And again, we're not getting into how we bring those to life. We're talking about the message, the stuff we're saying first. So actually, Dennis, this was like the example for all examples, because this is some curation as well. If we're going with 10 different movies we've collected, we're adding value to the audience by grabbing things from different places and making, an easy to serve list. So this is things like resource lists, roundups. A lot of numbered lists fall into this category. Even some of our basic content, key players or key terms. It's the idea of asking yourself, like, okay, are there things we could collect from different places and bring together to tell this story? Like, would that be a useful mode of telling this story? I have the note here. Sometimes, especially with non-marketing folks, I think this is like a little bit of a heartbreaker, like glass breaking sound. But most of the lists you see that are the 50 people to follow, the 25 influencers you need to know, those are designed to activate influencers, right? The whole point is, here's a list of people who have a big audience that we'd like to reach and are probably going to share this list, right? So it can be a really valuable way to activate influencers in your space if you're including them in any sort of roundup. So that's always a nice hack to keep in mind. And then of course you can update and repeat these kinds of lists, especially again, back to our Netflix example, Dennis, like they're dropping movies all the time. We could probably do this monthly at this point. So definitely a fun idea. It also tends to be fairly light in terms of creation work. So if you're like tapped for resources, this is something that's usually a little easier to compile than maybe doing like a big in-depth piece of content or something. All right, next one's data. My guess is some of you are probably doing some data focused content, but the idea here is, can we tell the story through the numbers? I think, we're inclined to use numbers as like an accessory, like we're going to sprinkle some stats into a piece, but sometimes it's actually super advantageous to take a numbers heavy approach to really tell this story purely from the standpoint of statistics, really dive into the data, whether that's, research or a focus group or a survey that you did. This is the kind of thing, we see this every year. Content Marketing World, Content Marketing Institute and marketing profs, they always do their annual survey. They interview a ton of content marketers and then come out with this giant piece that's the survey results of all these different survey questions. So a very data driven piece. But this is the thing that I think is lovely about this is if you can use your own data of some kind, which I know we've got lots of restrictions in some places, but if you can use original data of some kind, there's an opportunity for a lot of earned media. And the best example I can give of these is all those food studies. So, every time a study comes out that's like, drinking 3 cups of coffee a day, extends your life by 12 minutes or something, one of those like food studies. There's one study from one person and that thing gets talked about everywhere. So we're probably not lucky enough to have such viral data, but there's a good chance, like with what Dennis is sharing here from Orbit Media, if you are the people collecting and putting out reliable data, people are gonna go ahead and share that because they have to link back to your original sourcing. So I always think it's a good opportunity. And that is saying the map of the US that shows the favorite food from each state. Yeah, or like the most Googled, searches or, things like that. Favorite Super Bowl snack. Those are always good. And we'll talk, map is actually one of the formats that we're going to talk about too, because I think that's underused and really, really fun. All right, next focus, again, we're going through that list of every time we got to tell a story, to ask, can I tell this story through the lens of, and in this case, history? So this is the reminder. I don't know about you all, but I feel like everything we do, the brief, the instruction, the goal is always like now or the future. What are we doing now? What's coming up next? What are we innovating? What's next? The next launch, the next event, the next everything. And I think there's so much value in many cases in actually looking to the past. So creating content that talks about how we got to where we are, content that is looking backward, and content that just kind of brings you up to speed on trends or evolutions can be super valuable. All right, and the last one here is example. So this is the reminder that sometimes trying to eat the whole elephant in one bite is not the way to go. Many of us are tasked with telling stories about really big ideas, innovation, disruption, Web3. We've got these huge topics we need to dive into in our content. And sometimes it's really hard for us to wrap our heads around as creators and for our audience. So looking for that one single example that can illustrate the broader story. Stories like this often have some sort of transition point that basically tells you've just listened to an example. Dennis is just one of the thousands of content marketers who took our survey this year and blah, 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 right? So there's that transition point of like, you just heard an example, here's the bigger trend we were illustrating. This kind of stuff is used really often. And to Andy's point earlier about like which categories things fall into, your example might be a person, right? Yeah, Jay Bear and Drew definitely do use examples a lot. It's a really useful structure. And then our last one here, and I know, believe me, you're like, we only got through the focuses, but you already know all the formats. That part goes a lot faster, don't worry. The processes is essentially anything that's instructional. So this is like your recipes, your tutorials, your how-to content, anything that's kind of walking your audience how to do something is your process focused content. And it doesn't have to be a physical process. This can be how to decide, how to recover from, how to determine. Like, it doesn't have to be a physical hands-on process either. right, so here's this list of 10. Again, these are in the book. You could screenshot this slide if it's useful. These are those 10 focuses. I like to use them as a checklist as part of that matrix to say, okay, we have an event coming up. We have a product launch. We're trying to share this message. Could we do it through the lens of people? Could we do it with a product focused story? Could we do it by focusing on the data, by focusing on the history? Kind of gives you all those different prompts for how you might bring that story to life. Now, the 10 formats here, the good news is that these are, again, much faster to go through our formats here. Are you able to see that still?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, cool. It dropped off my screen, but as long as you can see it, we're good to go. All right, so the familiar 5, we're going to jump right into because, again, you already know these. These are the 5 that you're probably using already in some capacity. Writing, and I have it as writing itself, not article, blog, ebook, because to me they're all writing. How long it is and where it lives is sort of agnostic, as long as it's written.
Actually,
Dennis,
Melanie, we still see
yeah?
the 10 format slide.
Oh, all right. Well, that's not good. Well, let's see. Let's see how we can fix that. You know what? Let me stop sharing and just try to resume the share here. And
Okay.
let's see if that does the trick.
While you're doing that, I'd like to go back your example of curation. There's a really good example. Joe Polizzi often talks about the very early days of Content Marketing Institute. His trick was to curate the list of the best content marketing blogs. So this is like before CMI became CMI, and it was like that was a great way to get recognition within the circle of content marketers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Is that working? You
Yes,
see it now?
Cool. See familiar 5. Yeah.
Excellent. So again, these formats already. We already have sort of a shared language around this. So this is a lot easier to wrap our heads around a lot faster. But essentially writing of any length, of any form, just writing. Infographic, we know, is sort of bringing data or information to life in a visual format. Again, if you don't have design resources, you could use something like Canva to pull this stuff together pretty easily. I've got audio in here. Only thing I want to mention here is that we often think audio means podcast, that if we say audio, we mean a person interviewing another person in 20 to 60-minute episodes. But there's a lot more you could do with audio. It could be environmental audio. It could be supplementary to a story. It can be sharing, the sounds that are associated with a given piece. Lots of opportunity there. Video, video, we all know video, especially after the last few years. But the one thing to note is that I actually have video and live video separate, because I think there is sometimes an instinct to just go with one or the other without much thought, like, hey, well, we could do it live. But you really do want to have intention behind choosing one or the other. So I like to keep them as separate prompts so we can consider whether the risks that are associated with live video are worth it in the particular case of the story we're trying to tell. All right, so here's a couple others. Image gallery. I love thinking of image galleries because I think that for the most part, we think of an image as like a thing that needs to be thrown into our articles or whatever. So we have a preview image, it appears at the top of the page. But collections of images can actually do really well on their own. This is carousels on Instagram. This is slideshows. This is, you could have them vertically oriented as well. But just a reminder that, hey, is there a way to tell this almost purely through the lens of images? And again, it's often, these boundaries are fuzzy, because if you have an image gallery, you probably have text captions, and that's okay. It's just to kind of give us each of these as a starting point for a prompt. Next one is a timeline. I'd actually be super curious to hear if anyone here is creating content in the form of a timeline. This is one of those that I think we consume a lot, but we don't think of it when it's time to create the content ourselves. Anytime your content mentions different points in time, works really well with history-focused content, especially. Timeline is probably a good answer for how to bring it to life, or at least how to supplement your content. The example I always give here too is if you're a fan of like the true crime genre of docuseries, documentaries, things like that, miniseries, there's always timelines, because they're helping us keep straight all these different things. When they found the evidence, when someone was arrested, when they were tried, when the appeal happened, right? They've got to keep us all informed. Oh, I love that. Dennis is saying the timelines used to document the history of an open source software project. That's super cool. Yeah, and Andy, you're right. It's great for interactive graphics, and so are maps, which we'll get to in a second. Where I've done timelines for live event recaps and investor relations. That's really good. I mean, the thing that's cool about timelines is it also takes a lot of information and breaks it down to make it really easy to consume and generally to navigate at your own pace as a user. So we tend to like it. Hopefully we can serve it up a little bit more for our audience. Quiz is the next one here. There's two more after this, but quiz is basically anytime we are taking information from our audience and serving up a limited number of responses. So this could be personality style quiz, which category do you get bucketed into, which product is right for you, which tier is right for you. Adobe has their famous, like, which creative type are you? Are you the disruptor or the visionary or the creator, whatever the case may be. And the one thing here is I think that we tend to think of building a quiz as like this big, complicated technical process that we don't have the budget or tools or developers for, at which point I just love to remind everyone that probably the most culturally famous style of quiz is the Cosmopolitan magazine quiz, which is text on a page with the answers upside down. So, it's totally doable. You don't need a crazy budget. You could do this as a slideshow where there's a question and then the answer on the next one. You could have people add up their totals to know which one they are. So this can be done very analog and doesn't necessarily need to be a huge, development expense. All right, next one is a tool. Now, the only confusion I think comes in between, are quiz and tool really that different? The difference to keep in mind here is a limited number of outcomes. That's a quiz, right? If you're scoring 1 to 100, the answer can't be orange or, LeBron James. Like, it's going to be between 1 and 100. If you're doing a tool, there's some sort of calculation happening so that you haven't actually individually chosen all the outcomes. You've chosen the calculation that is going to create a potentially unlimited number of outcomes. So this would be things like a converter, a calculator, Andy's saying you use a lot of calculators in the ag industry. The finance space uses a ton of these too. Insurance as well. Estimating your premiums or your payback estimate. Diagnostic tool. We see a lot of like measurement tools. How many cans of paint do you need for this particular thing? There's a lot of really cool tools out there. It's not the best fit for every project, but it's really fun exercise to prompt and say, could we make a tool to help tell this story? Is there a way to tell this story using a tool? And our last one, which I hinted at earlier, is a map. So similar true crime genre here. Anytime we're mentioning multiple geographic points, we can use a map to help make that more clear. Another point I like to make here is we think of maps as like navigational maps because that's what we use in our lives as consumers, but don't forget that maps don't have to be used for navigation. Gillette did a map of the face showing which direction hair grows in to help men shave in the right direction to reduce razor burn. You can do a map of a home showing different areas that are, I don't know, we did one for farmers insurance, I think, showing like different insurance risks in your home that you may not be aware of room by room. If you are a chiropractor, you can do, I don't know, pressure points on your back. Like you could do maps of all kinds of things. So think outside the GPS when considering maps as an option. All right, so here's those 10 formats. Again, those 10 formats are all in the book. You can screenshot this one here. There's a free guide that has all of these on my website as well. I'll try to find a link in a moment and share that. But the real magic here is when we combine these things together. So are y'all seeing the matrix slide here? So this is, again, and it seems overwhelming, but you already know all of this, right? You see all of those focuses across the top that we talked through: people, basics, details, history, etc. And down the left-hand side, you see all of the formats, which again, we already know. We're familiar with these as consumers: writing, infographic, audio, video, etc. And what you end up with is 100 possible ways to tell any story. And to Andy's point earlier, you mentioned like what falls into what category. Most of the things we tell are going to have multiple focuses or multiple formats. That's just the way it works. We're telling big stories in most cases and telling them in multimedia ways. So you'll see multiple, but the idea here is to use this as like a guide to say, to force yourself out of the familiar. I don't know about all of you, but I've got favorite content formats, favorite content focuses that I default to because I like them, or they're comfortable, or I have the right tools and talent. So it's a good reminder to kind of step out of your comfort zone. And it's also a good way to make sure that you're trying new things, because, for all you know, your audience freaking loves quizzes, but you've never tried one. So you're missing out, So it's a good way to kind of try new things and see what resonates with our audience. A number of different ways you can do this. A random number generator works really well. I've got 10-sided die that I use the same way as like a creative exercise to say, okay, focus number 3, that's details, and format 6, and just kind of use it as a prompt to keep your energy going. It works really well in group settings too. You can create your own version of this that includes only the focuses and formats that are relevant to your business. You could do a 100-idea challenge where you want to use every format and every focus at least once throughout the course of a year. There's no wrong way to do it. But the idea is that when you have this model in your head, ideas are no longer a scarce resource. Anytime you think of any topic, any launch, event, product, feature, announcement, press release, like you've got 100 potential ways you could communicate that to your audience. So to me, that's the exciting thing, is like you already know all this stuff and you've got these 100 possible ways already in your head, which I think is really exciting. Dennis, I know we're running over time, so I want to do a time check with you. Do you want to scoot into the next portion here?
Yeah, we still have, we can go all the way to the top of the hour. So if there's more slides,
cool.
Feel free to continue.
Okay, cool. Well, then I'll drop this last little bit here. I mentioned earlier that there's something called multipliers. So when you have a good idea or you have a hunch about a good idea, how do you take that and make it into several good ideas? And we do that using multipliers. And those are the 4 things that I have here. And again, there's a bunch more information about this in the book, but basically, just at an overview, the idea is to ask, could we retell the story different ways depending on the time? So Dennis, your 10 Netflix, things to watch before they fall off Netflix, we mentioned then that could be done monthly, could be done quarterly, it could be done annually, like the I don't know, the 20 movies we we're most sad to lose in 2022, right? So that can be repeated. Time could also refer to how long it takes to do something. So this is your 30-day challenge, your 60-day challenge, your 90-day challenge, your 15-minute makeover, your 20-minute makeover, your 1-hour makeover. There's a lot of ways you can spend time there, but basically to ask, is there a time element here? And if so, could we sort of adapt and repeat this piece of content for different time blocks? The next one is demographic. Now, I'm sure you all know this, but I always like to point out, just to be safe, the goal with using a demographic multiplier is not to pander to an audience, not to simply like put them in the headline and serve them the same content. But the question to ask is, would this content differ if it was made for a different audience? So I'll give you the best example I can think of. We're tax time. We're in that season of life here with tax time. So common tax deductions for freelancers, for entrepreneurs, for families, for single parents, for immigrants. Like there's an almost endless number of tax recommendations you could make, and based on the demographic, that recommendation would actually be different, right? The content would be adapted a little bit for a new audience. So this is a really fun reminder to tap into any sort of NFT investors. I didn't even think of that, Dennis. The thought of NFT taxes makes me really anxious, and I don't even have any NFTs. It just sounds like a mess. But we need that list to go for sure. But yeah, so anytime you have like multiple avatars or different like sub audiences, this is kind of that reminder to go back and say, okay, could we adapt this to fit these different groups and make the content even more relevant than more, a generic version. Location, again, probably pretty self-explanatory. We think the geographic way, this is the best, day trips from Raleigh, best day trips from, Phoenix, best day trips from wherever. We see location like by school. So, you might have a different version for UNC versus, UConn versus Syracuse, just arbitrarily listing schools that I have connections to, but, go ahead and use your favorite schools of choice. Again, you can do this for locations within the home, locations on the body, locations on a particular product. There's a lot of room here, but just asking, are we mentioning a place in this piece of content? And if we change the place we mention, would it change the content and potentially still be useful to our audience? And then the last one is resources. So this can go a couple different ways. Money is probably one of the most common resources that we see this done for. So this is, Mother's Day gifts under $50, under $100, under $20. We see, all those different lists popping up where the amount of money you have at your disposal, would impact whether this content was relevant for you. If you are at all into like cooking or, baking or something like that, you've probably searched for versions of recipes that had different ingredients or resources. So, how to make this without a hand mixer or without an air fryer, or, without nuts, without soy, without dairy, without gluten. So thinking about what are the resources that go into this piece, and, really thinking, can we adapt that and make it relevant? I love to use an individual recipe and say, if you're a recipe blogger and you've got a really popular recipe, I would be doing that, the keto version, the vegan version, the, gluten-free, low sodium, low sugar, like I would do all of it, because if that recipe is awesome, then surely there's a bunch of people who would love to use that recipe, but can't, right? So, the best way I think to multiply, success by different resources. And then the reminder here that like time could also be a resource, number of people, IKEA likes to tell us in their content, is this a 2-person build, a 2-person lift, a 3-person build for the furniture, right? So, people could be a resource depending on the topic. Resource could also be like the size of your team. So here's what we recommend for teams between, 1 and 5 people, for teams between 6 and 25 people. Lots of different options you could riff on there. But again, just asking the question, if we have different resources, our audience has different resources available, can we create alternative versions of this content that speaks to their needs? So when you do that list of 100, if you're applying some multipliers, like that's where we start getting into, okay, we're new demographics, new locations, different times, different resources. That's where the 100 becomes 300, 500, 1,000, right? This is how we can kind of, take it and make sure we're coming up with as many as possible. The last thing I just always like to talk about when we're going through this is that I don't want you to make 100 or 300 or 500 pieces of content about the same thing. Like, God knows none of us have the time or resources, speaking of, to do that. But it will hopefully keep you from being in a point where I don't know what to post, I don't know what to say, I don't know how to approach this same topic we talk about all the time in a new way. I don't know how to keep this fresh. It will kind of keep you from having those moments because you have so many options to call on. They won't all be good, but it is a really good creative exercise to understand that you have no limit to the number of ways you can communicate your story and your message to your audience. It is truly an unlimited resource. Content ideas are an unlimited resource as long as you know how to mine for them. And so hopefully this system gives you a productive way to mine for ideas whenever you do need them, so that you never have that moment of, I'm not really sure what kind of content to create for this story. So that's all I've got. I've got my my info up here. Happy to connect with everybody. I'm mostly on Twitter. I'm a Twitter person. If you are, probably no surprise. I feel like we're a Twitter heavy demographic, content folks, but that's where you'll find me most often.
Thanks so much, Melanie. Yeah, I think those final few slides are so important. It's the framework for thinking about an idea, but because I think a natural inclination for someone just seeing this is, okay, let's make sure we hit all 100 in the first year. But
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, a really fun thing to do is kind of try to find those really difficult combinations. But I honestly, I have not found combinations that don't work. There's an example for all of them, right? But some naturally just pair better. A timeline and history, like those are natural best friends, a curated list and then an image gallery, like of course they're together, like that just makes sense. But kind of challenging yourself to think outside of those obvious combinations, I think, is where some really cool stuff comes up.
Yeah. All right, folks, in just a few minutes, I will be giving away 5 free copies of the book, but who's got a question? Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
Hey, Dennis, it's Rich. I have a comment and a question. First of all, thank you, Melanie. Great presentation. Real
Awesome.
pragmatic and actionable kind of framework thinking. We're of similar minds. And my apologies. I joined late and I'm leaving early and was in transit, so I might have missed this. But before I get to the question, quick comment on timelines. In another life, when I was the features editor of Oracle Magazine, we used to do a print magazine. We did a big celebratory timeline on the 25th anniversary of Oracle. This was, as you can imagine, a long time ago. And we used that to showcase not tooting our own horn, but drawing in customers and the love they had for us. And it was kind of a win-win. So I would think about how can you do a retrospective timeline piece on an anniversary of sorts, if not an anniversary of your company, then some anniversary relevant to your industry, right? Something that you can kind of not newsjack, but sort of ride the coattails of, there's general interest on, and then you have a perspective to share. So I +1 on timelines and timing and whatnot. We also had a back page column called Time Capsule, which anyway, question. The question was, I know you differentiate between static or replay video on demand and live video. Great. Did you also mention podcasting? I'm a little late to the game, but I now find myself very addicted to podcasts. How do those fit in?
Yeah, so I mentioned audio as a format. That may have been just before you joined. But yeah, my emphasis was that, I think we think of audio and podcast as being synonymous, but there's a lot of other ways you can use audio really creatively too. I love what I call environmental audio. So if I'm reading a story about the Amazon, like I want to hear the birds and the monkeys and like whatever else is going on in the Amazon, even if I'm reading, right? If I'm looking at photos from the red carpet, like I want to hear the cameras flashing, I want to hear people shouting out to the celebrities. Like it kind of transports you. So I think there's a lot of cool options in audio that are not necessarily a serial podcast.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot of us are into podcasts. It might be, maybe we should drop some of our favorite podcast recommendations so we can all feed one another's addiction. We can enable a little bit here.
And question, how many people can relate to one podcast suddenly makes you aware of other podcasts, suddenly makes you aware of other podcasts, and you're down the rabbit hole?
It's podception.
Right?
Yeah.
Other questions? Anyone?
I have a question, Dennis. First of all, Melanie, great presentation. I love the matrix. I'm very visual, and that just makes complete sense to me. Just from a process perspective, because I want to implement this with a few clients, do you have any recommendations for how you actually get input from multiple stakeholders into that? I'm assuming that the matrix, to say with the different categories across the top and bottom, like Excel spreadsheet or something, or?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways you could do it. I would say that it depends on the teams and like, your teams best in terms of how engaged they are and like whether they like in person or remote or whatever else. I like to give people some of these prompts ahead of time. You can chunk it up to say like, okay, in this next brainstorm, we're going to think about, new storytelling formats for this particular story we're trying to tell, and give them the list of formats ahead of time, in the invite, to say, we're going to get together and talk about how we might talk about this product release in these different ways, right? So kind of chunk it up and introduce them to parts of it, because it's really about it being plentiful, right? So we don't have to necessarily tackle it all at once. But otherwise, you could do an Excel spreadsheet. I have a workbook version of it on my website, actually, if that's of interest, where it's like a bunch of prompts and like fill in the blanks of those grids. But yeah, you can make your own spreadsheet, your own 10 by 10, and have everybody make a copy or have their own sheet and fill stuff in. I did that. So I created a course for City University of New York based on the book. And that's the final project, is a spreadsheet where they've got to fill in all 100, which is a lot. Actually, I only make them do 90, so they can pick and choose a little bit. But it's a really fun challenge, I think.
That's cool. It also sounds like it might be worthwhile to have like a kickoff session, just explain, this is the framework, this is what these things mean, this is what we're looking for. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah,
for sure. And reach out to me if it would be helpful. We can do, like, if the team needs copies of books, we can do like, at cost print runs and stuff like that. Can come in and do a session if it's helpful.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah, this old marketing, I'm so glad it's back. I mean, those of us who have been around the block for a while, we were without PNR, this old marketing, for quite a while, but it's back and it's better than ever.
Yeah.
Uh,
I don't think people realize. I think it came back in 2020, and Joe and Robert kept saying, like, why don't people know that we're back?
I mean, it feels like they just came back,
Oh,
but
no,
I
they
guess
didn't. I mean, yeah, it's a whole separate
let's see.
discussion, like, because a podcast is kind of a mix of owned media and rented land, because you have to depend on these platforms. So there's kind of a discussion, like, how could Robert and Joe have let their audience know more directly that they're back? Because a lot of people,
that's a lot. Yeah.
I have a question, Melanie. So
Yeah.
you talk about, all these different ideas, and obviously you don't want people doing all of them. How do you account for, kind of continuity of content for your audience, right? So you're doing quizzes, you're doing all these different contents, which I'm a huge fan of, like lots of different kinds of content.
Yeah.
But we also don't want both from a brand perspective and messaging perspective, we don't want to throw too much at our audience. So how do you account for that?
So I think we'll all still have our favorites that we lean on, like, this old marketing, the podcast is still going to come out, every time. It's consistent, but every now and then they do let us know, like, hey, we've done this special report, you can go download, or, one of our sponsors has, or we've got this new, the new survey is out. So I think if you have your kind of mainstays that you already have series or recurring, themes, you can stick with those, but start to experiment with special occasions. So I forget who it was, Rich, I think, mentioned, like, anniversary. That's a great time to experiment with a timeline, because it is sort of a one-off event. People won't expect it to be, timeline of the week or something. But yeah, I would look for special events as an opportunity to do that. And then anytime you're launching something new, like, use that as an opportunity to experiment with something if you need, like, an excuse to introduce it. The other thing you can do from a consistency standpoint is use these things as supplementary, at least to start. So if you're doing, like, articles on the blog, embed an infographic within the article, embed a video within the article, and test and see how those things go. You could do the same thing with a map. You could try out other formats as sort of supplementary, so that you're not sort of mixing up the delivery all the time.
Great.
So I'm going to cap the question period so I can announce the book winners. I'm going to announce, so if you're a winner, I put my email address in the chat. You can contact me and we'll arrange to get the book to you. So Renee, congrats. Roy, Julie Jervis. Okay, Julie's still on. So that's 3. I think Rudrendu has left. Shatonia is 4. And David Parker is 5. So hopefully you heard your names. Contact me and we'll get you a copy of the book.
And I'm glad you didn't call out my name.
You're glad I did not call your name?
Because I already got it. I've had it for a while.
So do I.
And I guess we have
I'm sitting
time for
back
one.
here.
Oh yeah, we have time for one more question. Who wants to ask the final question? No one?
Melanie, do you want to give us a sneak peek to what you're speaking about at Content Marketing World this year?
So, fun fact, I don't know yet. I'm not sure yet. I'm still chatting with the Content Marketing World folks. So I mentioned earlier about the publishing thing. The talk last year was about my upcoming book, Prove It, which is coming out later this year. But because of the delays, the book hasn't come out yet. So I don't have, like, a new topic for post-book launch, because I'm still in the pre-book launch phase. So we're working on it. Taking suggestions, please slide into my DMs, send me an email, like, what I should talk about.
Well, I'm talking about creating flexible content within a framework. So don't do that one.
Okay, won't do that.
We're competing against each other.
I won't do that. No frameworks.
All right, well, Melanie, thanks so much for joining us, and best wishes with the allergies.
Yeah, thank you. I will go take some Sudafed after this.
Excellent.
You did a great job. We couldn't
Thank
tell
you.
it all.
All right, good. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you.